Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is a rather frequent guest on the show, Lila Bennett, who is the executive director of the Journey to Recovery. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, you're a relatively frequent visitor during the last maybe 2-3 years. You've had different hats on, and today you're going to have two hats on that you've done in the past, but you have recently published another book.
Yes.
And you are the director of the Journey to Recovery. Mm-hmm. First of all, what is the Journey to Recovery?
Yes, so Journey to Recovery Community Center is a peer-supported recovery center here in Newport. It's right across from the hospital in the Birchwood Medical Office buildings. And basically what we do is we have one-on-one coaching with people who are struggling with any kind of addiction, substance use, or their family members. We offer support groups for geared directly towards heavier drugs, and then some support groups toward alcohol. And then we also just provide one-on-one coaching with coaches who have either shared or lived experience. So that means that we've either struggled with an addiction ourselves, or we had a family member or close loved one who struggled. So we really understand it personally and understand how to rebuild. And that's the whole point of Journey to Recovery. It's about providing coping skills and tools for rebuilding your life in a way that's going to get you away from trying to comfort yourself with substances.
And this is free, correct?
Yes, it is free. We are a nonprofit organization. We run entirely by grants and donations, and we are also open 24/7 with our social detox bed. So if you are in extreme crisis, you can go to North Country Hospital, get medically cleared, and then stay with us until we can get you into inpatient treatment.
And you're not like a clinic where they offer methadone and buprenorphine.
No, we do not provide any medication at all. We are not doctors. We're not nurses. We are not therapists. We are coaches. We are real people helping real people. We are trained. We have certification. We are certified recovery coaches. So you go through extensive training, and it's ongoing. However, we are, the base of it is human to human.
Right.
And we see right now, especially here, our community is in a substance use crisis. People are turning to drugs and alcohol at a higher rate than ever before. We have all different kinds of drugs that are available. People are creating pills, pressing pills, and even though they look totally legit, they're not legit, and people are dying and becoming highly addicted very quickly.
I have an acquaintance who is a recovering addict, and he said that back when he became an addict, it was with pills and then heroin, and he says that was bad enough. He said, but anybody to actually use illegal substance, opiates, he says, you're totally risking it. He said there's very little heroin left here.
That's true. That's true.
It's fentanyl, and he says you never know where you're going to find it.
That's right.
And he says that you have a real death wish. He said, back in the old days, like a few years ago, he said you pretty much knew what you would get, and he says you don't even know where you're going to find it now.
I mean, by and large, when people come to the hospital after an overdose, they do not have heroin in their system. They have fentanyl. Even if they were smoking crack or doing cocaine, there's fentanyl in it. It's extremely addictive. It's very deadly. And also, all of this is happening because, even though we are evolving in terms of talking about mental health and talking about trauma, it's still very new. It's still very stigmatized. There's a lot of shame wrapped around it. And people are trying to handle very traumatic pasts, and they don't know what to do. And if they accidentally take a pill from a friend, it's got some fentanyl in it, whatever, suddenly they're addicted or they've overdosed. It's everything is moving at a much faster rate than it ever did before.
Actually, just this morning I was having this talk with my daughter, who a similar talk. She lives in the UP of Michigan, which is the Northeast Kingdom version of Michigan, and she lives in Marquette, where she said that she just cannot believe, though, how many more activities there are for people. And I think she just thinks that sometimes people just, there's, maybe you'll disagree, but compared to when she was living in Vermont, northern Vermont, she just said there's so many more opportunities. Yeah. And, I'm not saying that somebody's going to say, hey, you want a joint? No, let's go play ball. But, I think I can say this because I was born and raised here, but I think sometimes we also have generational issues.
Yes.
We have, and sometimes we don't know the rest of the world either. I guess I can't really explain it.
Well, I don't think it's helpful to compare it to the rest of the world. I think nationally we have a substance use crisis. Yeah. It doesn't really matter if there's more things to do or less things to do. However, for our community, there's a lot of confusion around substance use. So like what you're saying, there isn't a lot to do. High school, it's cool to drink. Yeah. It's cool to go to high school parties. It's cool to smoke some pot. Now we've got cannabis that's legal, so it's like another bit of confusion about what's the line between recreational substance use and then abuse.
Right.
And we have parents who are drinking every day, smoking pot every day. Maybe they're not doing any hard drugs, but they are using substances to cope and not talk about feelings, not be present. And that's like a cultural norm here, and it's very destructive, and it's also just very confusing for our kids. And what happens with that is it is a slippery slope, because when you're up here, you don't have a lot to do. You want to fit in with your friends. You're going to be drinking. It takes away the ability to get to know yourself.
Right.
And so when you've started at a young age using alcohol, whatever drugs, to feel confident, connected, comforted, whatever those things are, it robs your ability to learn how to do that without them. Right. And that's when you fast forward 5, 10, 20 years and you are in a mess. Right.
Well, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to write about it sometime, is one thing I've learned after becoming a widower. I'm so sorry. Thanks. I've chronicled things, and I've written about them on widower sites. And one thing I've noticed is Penny and we lived, must be our sheltered life, and I like a good craft beer. But the one thing I noticed, though, now, because when you lose somebody, a long relationship, you're a we for so long, and then you have to transition to a me. Mm-hmm. But so I've done things a little different, and I've really kicked down the doors and experienced the world too of being a me, which isn't always easy. But one thing I have noticed that I didn't realize is I got married at, I think, 19, Penny was 18, something like that, and we were never big drinkers. Now that I'm out there, it's like, maybe it's not only here, probably it isn't, but this area really revolves around drinking.
It does.
I never really noticed that. Mm-hmm. Is like you go to a 5-year-old birthday for 5-year-old's birthday
Everybody's
party.
drinking.
Yeah, and now, like I joked when Penny was still alive that sometime we're going to go to Sanders Village. There'll be a beer tent. Well, that never happened, but Storyland has a beer drinking area, and so what I'm saying is, I have been, that is one eye opener for me since Penny died is, yes, we drank. Yes, we had friends who drank, but I never understood the scope of how much alcohol is a huge part of people's lives here.
Yes, it's a huge part of people's lives, and it's really destructive now. But here's the thing, is that, like, there's a difference between people who can truly drink recreationally,
Right.
like you guys, where you can go and have a beer every once in a while, and maybe you go to a party and you have a few beers, and then the next day you're like, whoops, and that's fine. That's like sort of within the realm of normal.
Right.
What's not within the realm of normal is when that's your only way of, like, connecting. It's your only way of feeling interesting. It's your only way of thinking that you're cool. It's the only way of, like, doing anything with your friends. And that's what's happening up here. And that's why I wrote this book.
Yeah.
I wrote this book because,
What is it called? Free?
it's called Break Free.
Oh, Break Free.
Break Free, a step-by-step guide to stop addiction and heal the patterns that led you there. So this is about when you have crossed the line from recreational, whatever you're doing, to having it take over your life, having it take over your ability to connect, make friends, whatever it is, and understanding why you're drawn to that, and how to change, how to be able to heal the things that you don't feel enough of inside of you, to be able to be a whole person. A lot of the times we just are, like, overcompensating all day long for what we don't think we are. And also our culture is forcing that down our throats, like, you're not interesting unless you go party. And actually it's the opposite. Like, you can be incredibly interesting and not have to get wasted. And that's hard for people to understand, especially when our culture is so geared around it.
Right.
But at the end of the day, more people than not are getting themselves to a place where their drinking that used to work for them isn't working for them anymore. And they're losing everything. Their relationships aren't working. They're not able to connect with their kids. They can't hold their job, or they're not doing a great job, or they're just unhappy. They're just miserable. And it's possible to find the balance. Now, some people, especially like hard drugs, right? Like crack, heroin, fentanyl, anything like that, pills, whether you started that innocently from a surgery or an accident or whatever, and then all of a sudden you find yourself completely lost, you've lost everything, and you can't stop, you have to really buckle down and do the work to understand how to change the chemistry in your mind to not need to revert to that. And it does take discipline, and it does take practice, and this book does help with that. This book also helps with understanding where your line is. Where is your line? Some people, you can never have another drink again. And some people can figure out how to get back to being a responsible drinker.
Right.
And there is no one path. There is no right or wrong. But there is, like, your own line, and you have to understand your own line. And that's why I wrote this, because we see every single kind of person, every single kind of addiction comes through our doors. And what you're really looking for at the end of the day is how to understand yourself so you can go forward and, like, make decisions from a healthy place.
I had a friend who, it was a lighthearted discussion about he's an upstanding citizen here, and he's a recovering alcoholic. and he actually had to go away, and he was musing with me that, boy, Scott, I don't know, I may have quit too early. He says, because when he quit was right at the arrival of microbrews and craft beers. He said that stuff looks really good, and then he says, Scott, they make some non-alcoholic microbrews and craft beers. He said, you think I ought to try the non-alcoholic? I said, you know what? I said, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you battled to get to where you are. I said, yeah, they're interested in the drink, but considering what you went through, I'm not quite certain whether...
It's not safe for someone to go back to a substance until they understand what is happening chemically in their brain and in their body. Because addiction is chemical. And like everything about our lives, we're looking for balance. It doesn't matter what we're doing. You get up in the morning, you have a cup of coffee. You drink too much coffee, you're like, ugh, and you feel funny and you need to get back. You got to go eat something, We're all looking for balance. And so if you have trauma in your life, if you have depression, if you are just, you don't like yourself, especially like what happens is in high school's shitty for everybody. Nobody knows themselves. You're trying to figure it out. You don't like yourself. Some peer is telling you you're ugly. You start to use substances to get over it, and then you don't understand how to create that same kind of dopamine balance in your body without it. And so learning how to create balance in your body is really the key to getting ahead of addiction. And so, for some people it's easier, and for some people it's very, very difficult, and it's going to take a lot of support. I know of two addicts who are, recovering addicts who are doing very well, and they did say the one thing is you've got to stop using excuses, though, and you have to rely on, because all those, everything, well, maybe you had a bad life, maybe, or whatever, but the bottom line is the one who's in charge of this is the person looking at you in the mirror, because he said, and they said, yeah, you've got to come to grips with, your past, but on the other hand, it's, you got to look at that person and say, okay, you are the one. Yes. And the reason that I put this together, and this is really short, this is a workbook.
And now you wrote this.
I wrote this. Yeah. I wrote this. I put it together. This is everything that I see in real time every day that works at the recovery center. And, we're usually like scrambling around trying to find different things to put together to help people. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to put it in one place. So for one thing, when you're struggling with an addiction, sometimes it is like the excuses get in the way, the shame gets in the way. You don't know where to start. You just feel lost, and staying focused on any piece is difficult, especially if you get a ton of information all at once. And so this is like, it breaks it all down so that you can start to even begin to look at yourself. With addiction, it's really easy to just look at the whole world. The world is against me. That person screwed me over. I've always been bad at making friends. I've never been good at relationships. And this is like, well, okay, let's take a look at each of those things. And it's helpful to be able to just break it down into really simple steps so that you can start to stop being so scared to look inside. Right.
And I had at least one woman addict tell me, I think she came on my show, is sometimes, and I'm sure this is true of men too, I know it would be with men, just maybe different, is they said the scary part about recovery is you suddenly not only are dealing with your ancestral baggage, but you're dealing with baggage that you created during it, like with women who sell their bodies.
Yes.
That they then, when they start recovering, that stuff all just bubbles up, And that's how come some people, they say, go back into it because...
Yes. It's too much. It's so much shame. It's so much worthlessness. It's so much like, but I must be a stupid person. How could I have ever done that? You know, all of those things are real, and they do suck you back in. And having the ability to see that recovery isn't just like, boop. It's an up and down, and being able every time you come down and you hit another low, you have to have a cushion of coping skills, and that's what this does, and that's what the recovery center does. Is we're like, oh, but we're here. You're not just going to crash to the bottom again. Like, here we're going to look at this, and you do matter. And you know, I think it's hard right now too, because you know, there's alcoholism, and that's very destructive and culturally accepted, and so many people are suffering and losing their jobs right now. It's a little bit more like under the radar because there's many like functional alcoholics, but they're suffering. Like, make no mistake, they're suffering, and we see them and we help them. And then there's like your poster, you know, definition of like a hard drug addict, and you read about it every day in the paper, and you see the people shooting each other, and you see the robberies, and you see all of that, and it's frustrating, and it makes our community angry, and we say like, oh, they got what they deserved, you know. And but then when you talk to anyone who's in that position, you will hear their story. You will hear how they got there. And yes, at that point, it's up to them to decide if they want to really do the work to change. But when they're in it, they're reacting from a place of extreme pain, and the drugs that are hitting the brain today are making people absolutely crazy. They are making people do terrible things. It's not really who they are. Sometimes even, you know, why we started our detox bed was to give people a pause and get them a little break before they go to treatment. And sometimes in that little break, they're saying, I don't want to do this. They're not even in their right mind. Then they go to treatment and they say, thank you so much. I can't believe that I was just so like on the run for this drug, and getting people away from it. Then they return back to the human that they are.
Right.
And it is painful, and there is shame, and I think part of also why I wrote this and why I want so many people to be able to get their hands on it is because we have to be able to help people return to who they are. And that's what's going to strengthen our community.
So how does somebody get a copy of it?
They can go on Amazon and buy the paperback, just like this, or they can go on my website, which is lilabennett.com, and there's an ebook, and right now it's $4.99. It's just $5.
Oh, so really to cover the cost, more or less.
Yep, it's just to cover the cost. It's $4.99. You can get it, and you know, I'm trying to help people get who needs it, get their hands on it, and you know, so many people know a loved one. Like, I don't think there's any of us who aren't touched by substance use in one way or another. And so we all know somebody who needs the simple steps to just start the process.
Yeah, a bunch of little steps make a big one. And have you seen some real success stories?
Absolutely. We see, you know, that was a lot of why I had to put this in one place, is because the people who have done this, you know, and are continuing to do this, like, it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, for sure.
So, you know, from my perspective, not my perspective, but my warped probably perspective is...
We're all warped.
Is how, I guess it's like with smoking, you know, with smoking, I think now, you know, no disrespect to people who smoke because it is an addiction, but I can't conceptualize how somebody will now go into a store and, you know, for their first time and say, I'm going to start smoking, and they're going to be $10 a pack or whatever they are. And is now that there's so much information about opiates and the fentanyl, is there less people now starting, or?
No. There's more people because, for one thing, we are very confused about the line between acceptable pills and drug addiction. And so there are many, many, many people in this world who are abusing pills, and it starts with a prescription they get from a doctor, and then they find themselves down at the gas station buying pills from a stranger because it takes over. And the thing about any kind of addiction is that it doesn't happen like that. It happens sneakily. Addiction is sneaky. It happens, over it can be years, or it can be much shorter, but the problem is it's sneaky. So people who think they would never get addicted to fentanyl started with a pill.
Right.
And we see it all the time. Like, we see nurses, we see doctors, we see teachers, we see lawyers, we see landscapers, we see every kind of person who is a salt of the earth, really good person,
right,
who is like, I cannot believe that I am in this place.
Well, this is a little strange one. There's also showing up in veterinarians, because what's going on is the dogs are getting into somebody's stash. Because vet was telling me, because she was telling me if a dog, she realizes if the person, they could tell if she looks at a dog and they're saying this dog is stoned and she says, listen, I'm not a mandatory reporter. I'm not going to judge you. What did this dog get into? Because they said if it's marijuana, like edibles, it's going to be stoned out of its mind for a while. But then if it's an opiate, she needs to know. And she was telling me there's an uptick.
Yeah.
And so that's just another little oddity with this.
Well, I also think it's weird. Addiction is weird how, you might say, I don't ever want to be like my mom or my dad. I watched my dad drink. I watched my mom smoke crack. I mean, we work in the high school.
Yeah.
We work with students because we're trying to give them the tools to not go down those paths ahead of time. But there are so many people and young adults, 20s and 30s, who say, like, I never wanted to do that. I watched my parent, but then somehow here I am. Because when you have pain, when you don't know what to do, somehow you end up going down the same path that you know because it's what you've been conditioned to do.
Right.
And so even when you think you're not going to do it, it's really easy to end up there. So it's important to get the tools to heal what's hurting so that you're not more prone to it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, 'cause I can speak from experience here. And because because Penny prepared me so well for her demise, I could say I am doing well. I'm happy with how I'm doing, but I do notice it's very tempting to go, because I do go out a bit. Because Penny understood that trauma can actually make you want to drink more.
Yes.
And that's why Penny says, Scott, only 2 beers at a time. And that's what I do. Now, I might joke. I might joke to Tina down at the tea bars. And Tina, I said, you know Penny's rules. I said, I can only have 2 drinks. I said, you're only 16 ounces here. Dina at the east side, you can get them 23 ounces. I joke that Penny never, she said 2 beers.
She didn't specify.
She didn't specify.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, I can feel if I allowed myself, I could go down a road that I don't want to go down to.
Well, and it's easy to do. And, I think that's the thing about loss.
Yeah.
When you say someone breaks up with you, and all of a sudden you're alone. I mean, we aren't taught from an early age how to truly like ourselves.
Right.
We're not taught to be alone. We're taught to quick pair up,
Yeah.
you know? And so then when somebody leaves you, you just feel like you've lost so much of yourself. You're trying to fill that hole, and you drink too much, or you smoke a bunch of pot, or you do
Yeah.
any kind of, you know, whatever it is that you're doing to fill that hole. And then all of a sudden you're doing it all the time. You're not as functional at work. You're spending all your money. You're isolating yourself. Like, instead of healing and creating connection, you're only connecting yourself to the substance, because
Right.
that's like the easiest thing, you know. And instant gratification, we're taught in this culture too, with like phones and social media and everything, like, get that instant, you know, boost of better.
Oh yeah, we could go on social media addiction for hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got to
Really
wrap up.
running out of time.
Again, how do they
Okay.
buy it?
So you can go on my website, lilabennett.com. That's
Right.
where it is right now. You can buy the ebook on the website for $5. You can buy this hard copy on Amazon, and you just go to Amazon.com, or you can follow the link on my website.
Do they have it over at the clinic?
We will.
Okay.
It's just come out. We will have them over there as well. Yep.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for coming on. Last time I think you were on talking about another.
Yeah,
no,
so my other book quickly is about it's about love addiction, actually, and how people use toxic people to fill that void. Maybe it's not drugs you're using sex or people, and that is about breaking that cycle.
Right.
And that's called Break Up.
Right. Okay. Well, thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.